Rivendell is one of the most iconic locations in Tolkien's Middle-earth. It is a key resting place for both Frodo in The Lord of the Rings and Bilbo in The Hobbit. Plus, it's the home of Elrond. However, what you might not realize if you've only seen the Hobbit movies, or if it's been a while since you read the book, is that the film version of Bilbo and the dwarves' stay in this homely house is about 99% false. In the original version of the story, Tolkien takes us through a brief chapter called A Short Rest, in which our key characters do just that. But in the movie, this is expanded to about 40 minutes of screen time with multiple fabricated plot lines. So in today's video, let's unpack those scenes and reveal every change between them and their corresponding chapter in the book. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 3 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, The Hobbit Edition. As always, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happens in these scenes of the movie. That way it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. And don't worry, I'm not going to spend 40 minutes on this recap. We'll just hit the highlights. Picking up from where we left off in last episode, with Thorin's company looting the Troll Cave, we see Radagast pull up on everybody and inform Gandalf of his visit to Dol Guldur. Right at that moment, wargs enter the scene and start attacking, forcing the dwarves to make a run for it. Thankfully, Radagast is there to save the day and uses his rabbit sled to lead the orcs off in a different direction while Gandalf leads the dwarves and Bilbo to a secret path. This path through the rocks takes them to Rivendell, and they meet Elrond, who is returning from hunting the very orc pack that was chasing them. We then see them having dinner all together, and Elrond takes a look at their swords, identifying Glamdring and Orcrist. Plus, later that night, he looks at their map and reads the moon runes for them. Then, after a bit of conversation between Gandalf and Elrond, we see a meeting of the White Council, which includes Galadriel and Saruman. Saruman is adamant that the necromancer in Dol Guldur is nothing to be concerned about. Plus, he says that Thorin must not be allowed to continue his quest to Erebor. But Galadriel reads Gandalf's mind and realizes that he is stalling so that the dwarves and Bilbo can leave Rivendell without them realizing. The movie then cuts to exactly that as Bilbo gazes back at the homely house of Rivendell before continuing on with the dwarves. And finally, our scenes this week wrap up with Galadriel and Gandalf speaking alone as she tells him that she will always be there for him whenever he needs her. Now, I need to put a huge asterisk on this movie recap, because you might have noticed that I didn't cover any of the extended scenes this week. Well, unlike the previous 2 episodes, this week I am not even going to bother covering them, because the extended scenes here add absolutely nothing to the movie, at least in regards to the book. Everything that is additional here is completely made up, so it's not really worth covering in our changes this week. In future episodes, I'll only include the extended edition if they actually add something of value, but for this week, they get a pass. Now that being said, let's get things started by taking a look at our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. First up for characters, we have quite a few movie additions. Lindir the Elf is a real elf in Tolkien's works as he shows up in the Hall of Fire in The Lord of the Rings. However, he was really only added here to the film as a way for Figwit to make another appearance. Anyway, besides him, we of course have the additions of Radagast, Azog, Galadriel, Saruman, and the Necromancer. Just like Lindir, these are real characters, but they just don't make an appearance here in The Hobbit. Next, I will cover locations because I want to save timeline for last. Our location category is pretty easy this week. Simply put, the evil fortress of Dol Guldur is a movie-only edition, and so is the secret tunnel to Rivendell that Gandalf takes Thorin's company through. And that's it. Now, before we get into the plot changes, let's talk about timeline. And like I said, I saved this for last out of our first 3 categories because it's probably the most complicated. In the last episode, quite a few people rightly pointed out that I brushed aside the Dol Guldur subplot, because although it doesn't really happen in the way that the movie shows, the White Council's discussions about and attack on the Old Fortress do happen in Tolkien's lore, just on a completely different timeline. Thorin's quest for Erebor happened in 3rd Age 2941, and at the end of the Hobbit book, we do learn from Gandalf that when he disappeared, he had gone to the fortress, and the council had successfully scared off Sauron. But the idea that the discovery of the Necromancer, the meeting of the Wise, and the attack which caused Sauron to flee all happened within the same year is insane. In fact, in Tolkien's original version, this is spread over hundreds of years. So here is a very brief summary of the true timeline. And by the way, I am planning on making a full video about the entire history of Dol Guldur soon, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, around the year 1100 of the Third Age, the Council of the Wise, also known as the White Council, found out that an evil power had made its home in Dol Guldur. Fearing that this power might be Sauron himself, Gandalf went to investigate in the year 2063, nearly 1,000 years later, and the necromancer, not powerful enough yet, fled. 400 years later, in 2460, around the same time Smeagol found the One Ring, the necromancer returned. Fast forward another few hundred years, and in 2845, Thrain II, Thorin's father, was captured on his way to the Lonely Mountain. He had inherited one of the 7 dwarven rings of power from Thror, and Sauron took it from him in Dol Guldur. 5 years later, in 2850, Gandalf again visited the fortress and found Thrain dying in captivity. He had gone insane and didn't even tell Gandalf his own name or that of his son Thorin. But he did give Gandalf a map and a key. During this visit, Gandalf also confirmed that the necromancer was indeed Sauron. But a year later, despite Gandalf's warning, Saruman overruled an attack on the fortress, because in secret, he had begun searching for the One Ring. Finally, in 2941, Saruman couldn't hold it off any longer and agreed to an attack on Dol Guldur, which happened at the same time as Thorin's quest for Erebor, and is what caused Gandalf to leave them for a time. This attack was successful and forced Sauron to flee once again, and that is the true timeline of this dark fortress. It did not all happen within a year as the movie suggests, and again, I think I'll do a full history breakdown in more detail in a separate video. Now, before I head into the plot changes, I just want to give a shout out to Jason, Cody, Joshua, and the rest of my incredible Patreon supporters who keep this channel going every month. It's so fun to interact with everyone over on Patreon and hear input on things before they go out on this channel. If you're wanting to join in on the fun, you can become a member today by using the link in the description. Now that being said, let's dive into the few but the mighty plot changes. First, our scene opens up with Radagast arriving and delivering the news of Dol Guldur to Gandalf. And the obvious change here, as you can tell by the character and timeline categories, is that this never happens in the book. Instead, we read that after their troll fiasco, they went on traveling for multiple days, and although things seemed to get darker and become more spooky, they never saw Radagast or heard of this evil fortress. Plus, the next change is that they never even got attacked by orcs. Although they'll have many dangerous encounters to come, this one was fabricated for the film. And that brings us to our third change, which is all about their path to Rivendell. As we discussed in the location category, the secret tunnel that they take in the movie isn't real. What really happens in the book is that they followed a long path to find the valley where Rivendell is located, and this path was marked by white stones which were hard to find. Gandalf seemed to know his way around, but it was slow going as he bobbed around searching for the stones one by one. Finally, after much traveling, they came to the valley and peered out over a slope to see the beauty below. Although it's not like the movie where Rivendell is just there in the open. The last homely house is still hidden and hard to find, but they at least made it to the right valley. They then zigzagged their way down the slope to get to the land below and eventually heard the singing of elves. Which brings us to our next change, as we have been falsely led to believe that the singing of elves sounds like a children's choir. No, The Hobbit has a much different tone, one of joy and merriment. The singing of the elves is frankly jolly. I am definitely not going to sing anything for you right now, but I'd encourage you to do a quick Google search and look up the elf song in this chapter, because it's so drastically different from what we get in any of Peter Jackson's films. Additionally, this tone difference goes beyond just singing, because it also reveals the lighthearted nature of the dwarves and elves' relationship. They definitely aren't friends, but they aren't enemies, nor do dwarves hate elves. Tolkien writes this regarding their relationship: dwarves don't get on well with them. Even decent enough dwarves like Thorin and his friends think them foolish or get annoyed with them. For some elves tease them and laugh at them, and most of all at their beards. And this is true because on the next page after the elves have helped them get to Rivendell, they make fun of the dwarves' beards and call Bilbo fat. So they make fun of everyone evenly, not just the dwarves. But at the end of the day, it's all in good fun. As you can see, it's not so much a "you betrayed me and therefore my children's grandchildren will despise you," as much as it is a schoolyard type rivalry. Now, just to be clear, the prejudice between dwarves and elves is definitely there, and this entire story is written from Bilbo's voice and perspective, meaning that we'll have a Bilbo-esque twist on any given narrative. However, it still is incorrect for the movie to switch the tone of this entire journey to Rivendell to hatred or anger. In fact, as we'll see later, Thorin is perfectly courteous and kind to Elrond. Moving on, the next change is one that we've kind of already covered, but must be included as well in the plot section, and that is the fact that the White Council does not meet during this chapter. You already got the full timeline, so I won't repeat it here, but another thing I wanted to point out is that if the council had met, we would have also seen Círdan the shipwright, but somehow Círdan always gets left out. Anyway, moving on to the map reading scene, this is inspired from the book. Like I said earlier, they are in Rivendell for 2 weeks, and the dinner in which Elrond looks at their swords, plus their time reading the map, doesn't actually happen until the very last night before they depart. But that's not the change. The change is regarding the moon runes on the map. Although a simple difference, it must be said that they don't need a massive crystal on a cliff behind a waterfall in order to read them. It's a lot more boring than that, as Tolkien writes that Elrond simply held up the paper to the sky so that the moonlight could shine through it. And that's it. Also, this isn't much of a change, but I just wanted to mention that Tolkien says moon runes were invented by dwarves, so why didn't anyone in Thorin's company recognize them? Anyway, that's besides the point. Also, I want to point out a change here that I actually didn't even write down in my script, but I want to mention, and that is that elves aren't just strictly vegan or vegetarian. The movie makes a point to make it seem like the dwarves hate all the food in Rivendell, but Bilbo makes it clear that during their 2-week stay, they were very well fed and had a great time. So I just wanted to make that clear. Another change regarding the map reading is that Thorin in the book is almost shocked to learn that the secret runes have to do with Durin. And he says that Durin's day can't be predicted by them because they lack the skill to guess when it'll happen. It's almost like a solar eclipse, and they don't really know when the next one will be. And finally, the last change for these scenes comes at the very end of the chapter, as Tolkien writes that the next day, which was Midsummer's Morning, they all set out on their ponies to continue their quest. Elrond didn't try to stop them, Gandalf went with them, and they still had their ponies. So pretty much the movie got every part of this wrong. But other than that, there's not much more to say. Unfortunately, Bilbo doesn't share the fun details of his stay in Rivendell, and he writes, "I wish I had time to tell you even a few of the tales or 1 or 2 of the songs that they heard in that house. So we'll have to leave it up to the imagination." I think Peter Jackson and co. tried to fill in these gaps during the extended scenes, but if you've seen the extended edition, then you know that none of those scenes are even possibilities. But anyway, that wraps up things for today's episode, making it probably the shortest movies versus manuscripts to date, but that's for good reason. My upload schedule will be changing once again as I attempt to incorporate Wednesday videos into the mix, and if you haven't already, be sure to check out my video comparing Thorin and Gimli. Like I said earlier, this video is quite short because I decided that I should just make an entire video dedicated to the complete history of Dol Guldur. So although I went over things briefly in this video, keep an eye out for a more thorough video coming soon. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and check out the previous 2 episodes if you missed them. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.